Okay, let's start again, continue on these suttas. So we're going to look at a couple of more suttas that are kind of background suttas still. We're still working on the background, haven't got to the real deal yet, but again, because there are so many sessions, I thought it would be nice to do some of these background things. And the next one is called the Counterfeit of the True Dhamma, similar kind of thing as the previous one, but also quite nice in its own ways. So, the counterfeit of the true Dhamma. Thus have I heard. On one occasion the Blessed One was dwelling at Samadhi in Jeta's Grove and Anathapindika's Park. Then the Venerable Mahakassapa approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said to him, Venerable Sir, what is the reason, what is the cause? Why formerly there were fewer training rules, but more bhikkhus established in final knowledge, while now there are more training rules, but fewer bhikkhus established in final knowledge? Now this is an interesting question. Being established in final knowledge means that you are an arahant, right? So when there are less rules, there are more bhikkhus who are arahants. When there are more rules, it's the other way around. So what is the reason for that? This is what he replies, what the Buddha replies. That is the way it is, Kassapa, when beings are deteriorating and the true teaching is disappearing. There are more training rules, but fewer bhikkhus are established in final knowledge. Right? So the Buddha's answer is basically that when people are deteriorating, and of course, I think the way to understand this is that early on in the Buddha's teachings, the very first people who became ordained and who became monastics, people like Venerable Sariputta and these people, they were already had very sharp spiritual faculties. They became arahants quite easily. You didn't have to train them very much, didn't have to give them many rules. They knew that certain things were inappropriate, and they just didn't do those things, right? Because they knew that already. And of course, as the Dhamma, as the teaching of the Buddha become more famous, you get all kinds of people ordaining in the Sangha, right? And by all kinds, I really mean all kinds, right? When you read, this is one of the nice things about reading some of the stories in the Vinaya. When you read the Vinaya, you really see what the kind of really dodgy monks and some of the dodgy bhikkhunis as well that you actually got in those days. And of course some dodgy lay people as well. Everybody's dodgy people everywhere. But you got some really dodgy people ordaining, and the famous ones are the group of 6 monks. They're the most famous one. They were famous for doing everything wrong here. And of course the reason why they did everything wrong is that once the Dhamma is established, becoming a bhikkhu, especially at that time, was an easy way to make your livelihood, right? You just walked around and you got food given into your bowl, right? Really easy, don't have to work. Way, don't have to work. Okay, great. We will practice this life. And then after your meal, you kind of lie down in the shade of a nice tree, right? And you snore and you kind of have a good time. And this was kind of the idea. This is explicitly mentioned in the Vinaya as one of the reasons why people would go forth, right? Because it was an easy life. And especially maybe in India 2,500 years ago, you can maybe imagine if you came from a poor family, a poor background, there wasn't much prospects in society, that this might be a good way of earning your livelihood. Another reason why people became monastics was because the monks, the Sangha and the Buddha, they had the best doctor. Jivaka was the doctor of the Sangha at that time. He was one of the most famous doctors in India. He had studied at the famous university in Taxila, which is in present-day Pakistan. And that's where he had studied. He was a really good doctor. And then the people would think, oh, I can't really afford to go to a good doctor, right? How can I find a good doctor? I can ordain, right? So they ordained, and then as soon as they got better, they cured, they disrobed again and went back to ordinary life. And somebody was saying, there's something wrong about this. And then they laid down the rule that as a monastic, you were not allowed to ordain if you had certain illnesses, right? That was one of the rules that was laid down by the Buddha. So you didn't get all kind of spurious candidates becoming monastics. So it's actually quite interesting to read the Vinaya, because you see that people at that time had exactly the same defilements as people have now, same kind of crazy thing they would do. So in a sense it gives you a feeling that, yeah, you know, people weren't special in those days. It means that the Dhamma is still available now. We can still practice it. We can still get the same result, because it wasn't as if in those days people were just really special. Actually, they were just the same as they are now. So that is kind of the nice thing about reading the Vinaya. Apart from that, it is quite depressive, because the stories are not really inspiring. It's the suttas that are inspiring. The Vinaya is more like sometimes the reality of things on the ground was not quite as good as it should be. So, and this is why you get then more rules over time. You get more monastics, but the quality of the monastics is going down, right? The most spiritually advanced would have ordained quickly, and later on you get all these other kind of hangers-on that kind of are just trying to use the generosity of the lay people for their own purposes. So this is what is happening here. This is why you get more rules and you have fewer arahants. And then the Buddha says, Kassapa, the true Dhamma does not disappear as long as a counterfeit of the true Dhamma has not arisen in the world. But when a counterfeit of the true Dhamma arises in the world, then the true Dhamma disappears. Yeah, so this is interesting, isn't it? That the Dhamma, it is only when an alternative teaching, which looks beautiful, perhaps it is composed by poets with beautiful words and phrases, right, and this kind of thing. It looks so beautiful, it looks so enticing, and I can't stop myself saying this, but of course very often that new teaching will give you a shortcut, right? The easy way to awakening. This is the best way, it's better than the previous way, it's the fast way, and this kind of stuff. And that is when I'm always very suspicious. When I hear about the fast way, I also hear at the back of my mind the dodgy way, right? Fast way and dodgy way usually go together. The fast way, of course, is the way of the Buddha. It's the Noble Eightfold Path. Not is it only the fast way, it is the only way. In fact, this is one of the things the Buddha says in the suttas. He says in the Dhammapada, there is this nice verse that the path to, this is the only way to awakening, es eva maggo, this is the only path, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. There is no other way. Natti anyo sattanang visuddhya, for the purification of beings. This is the only way there is to awakening. And there's another sutta which I read out recently at the monastery in Perth. That's actually part of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, where Venerable Sariputta, he goes to the Buddha, and he says to the Buddha that I know that there is no other person more awakened, more enlightened than the Blessed One. And the Buddha asks him, well, have you seen, have you read the minds of all the Buddhas in the past and all the Buddhas in the future, and my mind now, so you know that everybody is the same? No, says Venerable Sariputta, but I know this from inference. I know the path to awakening. The path to awakening is the same for everyone. You have to abandon the 5 hindrances, getting your mind established in the 4 satipatthanas, practice the 7 factors of awakening. And that is the way to awakening. There is no other way. And it uses a nice simile. There's a simile of the fortified city. This fortified city has a wall going all the way around, and it has only one gate. And that gate, there is a gatekeeper who lets in all the friendly people, does not let in the enemies. And he knows that when that gatekeeper walks around the wall, around the whole city, there is no fissure, there's no gap in that wall which is large enough even for a cat to get into the city, right? All creatures larger than a cat will have to get into that city by going through the one gate, the only way that large creatures can get in. In exactly the same way, there's only one way to get to Nibbana: ban the 5 hindrances, 4 satipatthanas well established in mind, and then practicing the 7 factors of awakening. There is no other way. That is the only path. And then, of course, the Buddha says sadhu, sadhu, sadhu when he's finished with that. And this is a teaching which occurs a few places in the suttas. This is the only path. There is no other way. You have to follow that path, otherwise you'll be in trouble. So, anyway, I always, people want the easy way, right? You want the easy way, you don't want to kind of trouble too hard. Of course, you find the easy way. Actually, the easy way is the hard way. Why? Because you're stuck in samsara, going around and around and around, not really finding anything at all, right? This is the problem with the easy way here. Easy way turns out to be bad news. Never trust the easy way. When you go to university, you can't just buy a dodgy degree online. It is not the same as actually going to university and getting a proper degree, right? A similar kind of idea. So remember that. These counterfeit Dhammas, it's very hard to say exactly what the Buddha means by counterfeit Dhammas, but I think if you start looking around in the Buddhist world today, you'll find a lot of things that actually are, in my opinion, counterfeit Dhammas. Doesn't really lead to awakening, right? Kind of, chanting Amitofu, whatever it is, and then hoping that will take you to awakening and that kind of stuff. And that is not really, or just doing ritual. That's basically the same thing, just doing rituals and that kind of thing. Many, many other things as well, but we just have to be very aware of these kind of problems. So the Buddha says, just as Kasapa, gold does not disappear as long as counterfeit gold has not arisen in the world. But when counterfeit gold arises, then the true gold disappears. So true Dhamma does not disappear so long as a counterfeit of the true Dhamma has not arisen in the world. But when a counterfeit of the true Dhamma arises in the world, then the true Dhamma disappears. And yes, it is sometimes easy when you are kind of part of the Theravada tradition to kind of say that the bad Dhammas are all the non-Theravada things, right? It's easy to think like that. But you have to be very careful with that kind of thinking, because there is so much dodgy Dhamma everywhere, whether it's in Theravada, wherever it is, and there is some good Dhamma everywhere as well. So you have to be careful not to be too judgmental. We should always, wherever we go, we should always be careful and make sure that we find the real teaching, so to speak. Okay, so then the Buddha says, it is not the earth element, Kasapa, that causes the true Dhamma to disappear, nor the water element, nor the heat element, nor the air element. It is the foolish people who arise right here who cause the true Dhamma to disappear. People are always the fault, obviously, right? It's obviously people who get these things wrong. And this ties in very nicely what we saw in the previous sutta. The previous sutta gave us some very clear indications of how it is that wrong Dhamma appears, right? You saw all the backsliding, you saw the dark Dhamma, you saw the teachers who weren't able to train the disciples properly, and we saw all the listening to the disciples and the outsiders and the poets rather than listening to the word of the Buddha. All of that is part of this, the senseless people who cause the true Dhamma to disappear right here. The true Dhamma does not disappear all at once in the way that a ship sinks. I don't know if you're aware, if you see a ship sinking, it goes down very fast. The water comes in and glug, 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 and it's gone. Ship is disappearing. This is not the way the Dhamma disappears. There are, Kasapa, 5 detrimental things that lead to the decay and the disappearance of the true Dhamma. What are those 5? Here the bhikkhus, the bhikkhunis, the male lay followers and the female lay followers dwell without reference and deference towards the teacher. Teacher here is the Buddha. They dwell without reverence and deference towards the Dhamma, the teachings of that teacher. They dwell without reverence and deference towards the Sangha. This refers to the Arya Sangha, the noble ones who have realized that. They dwell without reverence and reference towards the training. They dwell without reverence and deference towards Samadhi. These Kasapa are the 5 detrimental things that lead to the decay and the disappearance of the true Dhamma. Yeah. Interesting here. You dwell without reverence and deference towards the Dhamma. In other words, this of course really means the suttas again, the early Buddhist text, the teachings of the Buddha. And of course, if you don't dwell with deference towards those teachings, you're also not dwelling with deference towards the Buddha, because the Buddha is the originator of those teachings. These things go together. So very interesting, isn't it? It means that not taking these things seriously, not reading these things, actually is a major cause for concern. And obviously here, again, it makes the point, this leads to the disappearance, the deterioration of the true Dhamma. So taking the Buddha seriously is kind of number one. Whenever the Buddha says something, it usually means that it is important. One of the important things, of course, here is things like the idea of rebirth, right? Very often, as I mentioned yesterday, you will hear people say that rebirth is just a later thing, something that was part of the Indian culture that the Buddha took on board because he thought that, because he didn't think about it properly. I don't know what they think. How can, but what do you mean the Buddha didn't think properly? It's kind of already not really taking the Buddha seriously, right? If you think like that. So, and that is precisely the problem. When the Buddha says in the suttas that there is such a thing as rebirth, when he says in the suttas that this is part of right view, of right outlook, of right vision according to reality, if you then dismiss that and you don't take it on board and you say, it's just a cultural thing, then you are not really having reverence for the teacher. You don't really have any, what kind of attitude is that towards the Dhamma when you kind of push those things aside in that way. If it's difficult for someone to believe in rebirth, fair enough, that's okay. You shouldn't force these beliefs onto you. But at the very least, you should try to have an open mind about it. You shouldn't say the Buddha was wrong. If you think the Buddha is wrong, how can you be a Buddhist? Right? The Buddha was all wrong, but I'm still a Buddhist. Wait a minute, what's going on here? It kind of doesn't make any sense anymore. If you think the Buddha was wrong, then you're not really a Buddhist. That's the whole point of being a Buddhist, that you believe a little bit in the Buddha, right? And this is one of those problematic things in the world. If the Buddha teaches rebirth, you don't really have much choice but to take it seriously at least. Okay, maybe you are a bit skeptical to begin with, maybe you want to give it some time to think about it, fair enough. We cannot force people to believe things. Obviously that is wrong. But at the very least, we should take this teaching seriously. And in the end, if you cannot believe in rebirth, so be it. But then also, maybe you have to accept that perhaps you are not really a Buddhist, right? If you say that you don't believe in the awakening of the Buddha, which the idea of rebirth is part of that awakening. If you don't believe in the awakening of the Buddha, it becomes very hard to be a Buddhist. At least that is my opinion. No doubt some people will disagree with that, but that is the way I look at that. So very important, these ideas that are mentioned here about having that reverence and deference for the Buddha, first of all, then the Dhamma, the teachings, then the Sangha, right? The Aryan Sangha. Remember again, it is very hard to know who the Aryan Sangha, who they are, right? It's very difficult to kind of pinpoint them. This monk, this nun, perhaps even this layperson, they are Aryas. So it is more like an idea that we know that if the Dhamma is still around, there will be Aryans in the world. And you may have a feeling for who some of these Aryans are, some of the people who behave consistently well, do the right thing. don't place your bets too heavily on that, because if you do and they end up doing something bad, you might get very disappointed later on. But sometimes at least you have some idea. You have some feeling that there are Aryans in the world, but it's more not specific individuals, but more a knowledge, understanding. As long as there is Dhamma, there will be Aryans as well. And then the training, right? If you have no deference and reverence for the training, that is what we were seeing in the previous sutta, where they didn't really practice the higher mind, the jhanas, the sila, and all of these kind of things. Of course, then it becomes very problematic if you have no reference, deference, and reverence for the training of the Buddha, the Sikha, the training that he gives. And very interesting, I think, is the last one here, is very extraordinary, that Samadhi is singled out in this way. If you have no reverence and deference to Samadhi, right, you are leading to the decay and disappearance of the true Dhamma. It's a very powerful statement about the importance of Samadhi, the importance of the jhanas on the Buddhist path. Yeah, and I always found that, I remember reading this first time many, many years ago, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. I thought, whoa, that is really strong and very, very powerful. So, again, and this is the thing that we saw the other day, the importance of Samadhi on the Buddhist path. Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Only when Panya, wisdom, is embedded, is kind of suffused, is completely enveloped in Samadhi, when Samadhi becomes really strong and supportive, that is when Panya has great fruit and great benefit, right? If you remember that sutta from yesterday. Sounds like a long time ago already we did that, right? There's been so many suttas in the meantime. But here again, you have another angle on that, the power and the importance of Samadhi on the Buddhist path, to the point where it leads to the detriment of Buddhism if you don't have deference and reverence for Samadhi. So keep that in mind, because this is, if you listen to certain teachers, this is very obvious. If you listen to other teachers, it is far from obvious that this is the case. So a very important point for that reason. Okay, these Kasapa are the 5 detrimental things that lead to the decay and disappearance of the true Dhamma. This is what these senseless people do. And of course, he's saying that it doesn't disappear all at once like a ship. So it's a gradual descent of the Dhamma, right? Gradual disappearing. And I think that in the world today, there is not that much real Dhamma left. There is a lot of all kinds of teachings, all kinds of things. But the real Dhamma is actually gradually going down. You can see that there's more and more diversity. Buddhism is kind of so enormous. Buddhism is enormous, but real Dhamma is getting very small. The real teachings are kind of getting very confined. And when you see that, when you remember that, it also gives you a sense of urgency. Wow, this is actually quite scary. The Dhamma is going away. Now is the chance to make use of the little remnant of the Dhamma that is still there, still in there. It will continue to go down. Maybe sometimes it goes a little bit up and then it goes down again, but the trend is downwards, right? The general trend is one going downwards. There are 5 things, Kasapa, that lead to the longevity of the true Dhamma, to its non-decay and non-disappearance. What are the 5? Here, the bhikkhus, the bhikkhunis, the male lay followers and the female lay followers dwell with reverence and deference towards the teacher. They dwell with reverence and deference towards the Dhamma. They dwell with reverence and deference towards the Sangha. They dwell with reverence and deference towards the training. They dwell with reverence and deference towards Samadhi. These Kasapa are the 5 things that lead to the longevity of the true Dhamma, to its non-decay and non-disappearance. So there you are. If you don't want the Dhamma to disappear too quickly, these are the kind of things that we have to do. And of course, it's interesting that in many of the other suttas, they just talk about the bhikkhus, but here specifically talks about all the 4 assemblies, bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, male and female lay followers. Everyone is here included. So it's important that we all do our part, so to speak, to ensure that the Dhamma lasts long time into the future for the benefit of so many people in the world. Okay, let us move on to the next sutta. And the next sutta is the famous Kalama Sutra, yeah? And it is actually called Kesaputtiya Sutta, but it is usually often called the Kalama Sutra among many Buddhists. And again, this is also a sutta, if you like, by way of background to understand the kind of attitude towards the Buddha's teachings. And it's important, I think, to understand also this Kalama Sutta in the right way. It's easy to overstate what the Kalama Sutta says and to take it the wrong way. So it's important to actually see this in a way which helps us in our Dhamma practice rather than blocks us. Sometimes the Kalama Sutta is seen, like in the West, like a charter of free inquiry. You can think whatever you like, right? That's kind of the idea sometimes. At least among some Westerners, probably some Asians as well these days, but certainly in the West, because it kind of fits in with the Western ideas sometimes. Yeah, you can think whatever you like, throw out the stuff you don't like, and take on board the things you want. But of course, again, this can often be problematic if you take that kind of attitude too far. A degree of inquiry is good, but it's always the balance again, and that balance is so important, right? In a sense, you can argue that the idea of the middle way is something you can find across the Buddha's teachings, and it's important almost in all contexts, also when it comes to this Kalama Sutta. So this sutta begins by the Buddha. Again, I have jumped to kind of the middle of the sutta here, but it begins by the Buddha. He's wandering around in the north of India at that time. This was something he did especially early on when he was the Buddha. He was wandering around and teaching people. Wherever there were people who wanted to listen to the Dhamma, he would teach them. Later on, he would settle down more. He would stay in Savatthi a lot, sometimes in Rajagaha. But in the early days, he would wander around. And there's lots of suttas which are precisely about this, the Buddha wandering around, being in conversation with various kinds of people. When you read the Digha Nikaya is full of that. He's discussing the Dhamma with Brahmins, with Jains, with all kinds of people. And it's actually quite nice when you see the Buddha in context like that, the way he handles these kind of things. And this is one of these suttas where we see the Buddha in this particular way, the way he deals with people who are not Buddhist, right? These are people who are not Buddhists. And this is, I think, one of the most important things to remember about this Kalama Sutta, that when the Buddha is teaching the Kalamas, these are people who are confused. These are people who don't really have any religion, right? They hear all these various teachers coming to them. They haven't got a clue who is right, who is wrong. Person A says X, person B comes and says negative X, the exact opposite. If A says X and B says negative X, who is right? They're exact opposite teachings. And for that reason, they are really confused about what is going on. And that kind of background is very important to understand the content of the sutta, why the Buddha teaches the way he does. Once you understand that background, then the teaching in the Kalama Sutta comes out quite nicely, and it's easy to understand what is going on. So the Buddha comes to the Kalamas, right? And then the Kalamas hear that this master has arrived in Kesaputtiya, and so they go out to see the master. They all kind of bow down to him, or some don't bow down, some kind of say the name, and some just sit down, all of these things. And then this is what happens. Sitting to one side, the Kalamas said to the Blessed One, Bhante, there are some ascetics and Brahmins who come to Kesaputtiya. They explain and elucidate their own doctrines. but disparage, denigrate, deride, and denounce the doctrines of others. But then some other ascetics and Brahmins come to Kesaputtiya, and they too explain and elucidate their own doctrines, but disparage, denigrate, and deride, and denounce the doctrine of others. We are perplexed and in doubt, Bhante, as to which of these good ascetics speak truth, and which speak falsehood. Right? This is sometimes the case, right? People say the exact opposite things, and both of them claim to be telling the truth. So how do you kind of work things out? This is what they're saying. We don't understand what's going on. All these ascetics and Brahmins telling kind of wildly different things. What are we going to do? And the Buddha replies, it is fitting for you to be perplexed, Kalamas, fitting for you to be in doubt. Doubt has arisen in you about a perplexing matter, about a doubtful matter. Right, this is kind of the first thing in the sutta, and I think already that much is already very nice already. In Buddhism, you are allowed to have doubt, right? You don't have to declare, I will follow the Buddha for eternity, and he is my teacher, and I have no doubt. There's nothing of that kind of stuff. It's okay to have doubts. It's okay to be uncertain. There are things that are inherently doubtful. There are things that we cannot really know until we get to a certain point on the path. And it's fine to have doubt. The Buddha doesn't say we shouldn't suppress it. If you suppress your doubt and pretend that you don't have doubt when you do it, you just make it worse. And then one day when you kind of have to, when you are faced with something, eventually you end up just throwing out everything because you haven't really been honest with yourself from the beginning here. So remember, the Buddha is saying here, you have, of course you have doubt. This is a perplexing matter. It's hard to understand. You should have doubt in this particular case. And this kind of attitude, I think, should inform us as Buddhists in many different ways. I was just talking about rebirth before, right? Now, even if we have faith and confidence that there is such a thing as rebirth, it is important to understand the distinction between faith and confidence and knowledge of rebirth. Right? Faith and confidence, okay, it's important to understand that this is what I have. I have